the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village of Umwaka. The air was thick with the scent of roasted maize and burning firewood, and the evening drums echoed through the land. Adanne sat outside her father's hut, her heart heavy with the weight of the many suitors she had turned away. She was a woman of rare beauty. Her deep brown skin glowed under the moonlight. Her eyes, like dark pools, held a wisdom beyond her years. Many men had come seeking her hand, bringing gifts of yams, livestock, and beads, yet none had stirred her heart. Her mother often told her, "A woman must marry when the time is right." But Adanne knew the time had not yet come. Then, on the night of the full moon, a stranger arrived in the village. He rode in on a horse as black as midnight, his garments woven from the richest silk, shimmering like water under the lanterns. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and a voice that rolled like distant thunder. His name was Obadele. He spoke with a charm that left the villagers spellbound, his laughter deep and rich. When he laid eyes on Adanne, he smiled, and something about that smile made her shiver, though she could not say why. Obadele did not come empty-handed. He brought gifts unlike any the village had seen before. Gold so pure it gleamed in the firelight, fabric so soft they felt like clouds, and jewelry that shimmered with strange colors. The people murmured in awe. Adanne's father, Ojukwu, examined the treasures with greedy eyes. A man of such wealth and power must be favored by the gods, he declared. That night, as the elders gathered to discuss the proposal, Adanne sat quietly, her unease growing. The village chief, an old man with a long white beard, stroked his chin. "We have not heard of this man's lineage. No one knows from which land he comes." "But he is generous," another elder argued, "and clearly the gods have smiled upon him." Obadele's deep voice carried across the gathering. "I have traveled from distant lands, far beyond the great river. My family is noble, but our kingdom is no more. I seek a wife, a home, and a future here." His words, smooth as palm oil, softened the doubts of the elders. Adanne's father did not hesitate. "You shall have my daughter." Adanne's heart pounded. "Father, please, should we not wait?" Ojukwu turned to her, his face hard. "The gods have sent this man to us. You will not refuse him." That night, as she lay in her sleeping mat, a chill passed over her. She dreamt of a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching her with hollow eyes. A whisper snaked through the air, soft but chilling. "Do not go with him." She woke with a start, her chest heaving. The night was still, but the feeling of being watched did not leave her. By morning, preparations for the wedding had begun. The entire village gathered for the ceremony. Women sang songs of love and prosperity, and the air was filled with the scent of freshly brewed palm wine. The men slaughtered a fattened ram, offering its blood to the gods for a blessed union. Adanne stood in the center of it all, her heart heavy. Her mother fastened coral beads around her neck, whispering, "Your husband is a great man. Do not shame our family with hesitation." Obadele arrived in a magnificent robe, a golden crown resting on his head. His eyes gleamed as he took Adanne's hands, his grip firm, almost possessive. The ceremony was swift. Drums thundered, the villagers cheered, and soon the sun dipped below the horizon once more. As the night deepened, it was time for Adanne to leave her family behind. Obadele led her to his horse, lifting her onto it with ease. The village women waved their white cloths, bidding her farewell, their voices fading as the couple rode deeper into the forest. At first, the ride was smooth. Fireflies danced in the air, their golden glow casting an eerie beauty over the path. But as they ventured further, the air grew colder, and the trees loomed taller, their branches twisting unnaturally. Adanne clutched her cloak, glancing at Obadele. His face was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. "Where is your home?" she asked hesitantly. "Not far," he replied, his voice softer than before. Silence stretched between them. The deeper they travelled, the stranger the forest became. The leaves whispered, though there was no wind. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, vanishing when she tried to focus on them. Suddenly, the horse halted. Obadele climbed down first, reaching up to help Adanne. Before her stood a great palace, hidden deep in the forest. The walls were high, built of black stone that glistened under the moonlight. Strange symbols were carved into the doors, symbols she did not recognize. Something about the place felt wrong. Obadele smiled. "Welcome home, my wife." The doors creaked open, revealing an empty hall. No servants, no welcoming relatives. Just an eerie silence that sent a shiver down Adanne's spine. She hesitated. "Where are your people?" Obadele's smile did not waver. "They will come soon. For now, you must rest." Adanne stepped inside, feeling the weight of the air press against her chest. The doors slammed shut behind her, echoing through the vast space. She had entered her husband's home. She had entered a place of secrets, and something deep within her whispered, "You should not have come." The journey through the dense forest seemed endless. The trees loomed taller, their twisted branches forming eerie silhouettes under the pale moonlight. The air was thick with an unsettling silence. No chirping of crickets, no distant howls of wild animals, just the soft thudding of the horse's hooves against the damp earth. Adanne wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the thick fabric of her bridal cloak. Obadele rode beside her, his expression unreadable. His hands held the reins with unnatural stillness, his posture unwavering. The deeper they travelled, the more her unease grew. "How much farther?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are close," he responded, his tone devoid of emotion. Minutes later, they emerged into a vast clearing. Adanne's breath caught in her throat. Before her stood a palace unlike anything she had ever seen. It gleamed under the moonlight, its towering walls built of dark stone, smooth and unbroken. Intricate carvings adorned the entrance, symbols that seemed to shift and writhe in the dim glow. Yet, something was missing. No guard stood watch. No servants bustled about. No welcoming voices greeted them. The entire place was silent. Obadele dismounted and turned to her. "Come, my wife," he said, extending his hand. Adanne hesitated. She forced a smile and allowed him to lead her inside. The doors creaked open, revealing a vast hall lit by flickering torches. The air smelled of damp stone and something else, something she couldn't quite place. Her footsteps echoed as she walked across the marble floor. Still, no sign of life. "Where is everyone?" she asked. Obadele glanced at her, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "They will come in time." A chill crawled down Adanne's spine. That night, she lay in a massive chamber, the silk sheets cool against her skin. Though exhaustion weighed on her, sleep did not come easily. The silence outside the palace was unnatural, as if the very forest held its breath. Then she heard it. A whisper. Soft, unintelligible murmurs crept through the walls, like voices carried by the wind. She held her breath, straining to listen. The sound came from somewhere deep within the palace. And then came the scratching. It started faintly, as if nails were raking against stone. Then it grew louder, closer. Adanne sat up, heart hammering. She turned towards Obadel, lying beside her. But something was wrong. He was awake, standing at the foot of the bed, motionless. His back was to her, his breathing slow and measured. The dim light from the torches cast long shadows across his form. Then he turned, just slightly. His eyes glowed faintly in the darkness. Adanne gasped, and in that instant he blinked, his eyes returning to normal. He smiled, stepping forward as if nothing had happened. "You are awake, my love," he murmured, brushing a hand across her cheek. "Sleep. You have nothing to fear." But Adanne did fear. The next morning, she wandered through the palace, determined to understand the mystery of her new home. The halls were endless, filled with doors that led to rooms covered in dust, untouched for years. Was she truly alone here? Then she found it. A door at the farthest end of the hall, tall, ancient, covered in markings that pulsed with an eerie glow. The handle was cold under her fingertips. She reached for it. "Do not touch that door, child." Adanne spun around, her heart leaping to her throat. An old woman stood behind her, her form shrouded in a dark cloak. Her face was wrinkled, her eyes sharp with warning. "Who are you?" Adanne asked, stepping back. The woman didn't answer. She moved closer, her fingers trembling as she grasped Adanne's wrist. "You must leave this place, before it is too late." Adanne's skin prickled. "What's behind this door?" The woman's eyes darted to the markings. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "His secret." Adanne's breath caught. She turned to ask more, but the woman was gone, as if she had never been there at all. That night, Adanne found herself alone. Obadele had disappeared without a word. The silence in the palace deepened, pressing against her ears. Then came the sound. Low, guttural, a growl. Adanne's body stiffened. The air grew thick, heavy with something primal. She moved cautiously towards the hallway, her bare feet making no sound against the floor. Another growl, this time closer. She reached the main hall, her fingers trembling as she peeked around the corner. And there, under the dim glow of the torches, she saw him. Obadele. No, not Obadele anymore. His body had changed, twisted, grotesque. His arms stretched unnaturally long, his fingers ending in razor-sharp claws. Dark fur rippled across his skin. His spine arched, his neck snapping back as a low, hungry snarl echoed through the hall. But it was his eyes that truly terrified her. Glowing, red, burning with something feral. Then his head snapped up, his nostrils flared. He sniffed the air. He was hunting. His lips curled back, revealing jagged fangs. Then, in a deep guttural voice, he growled her name. Adanne's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her foot brushing against a loose stone. The sound echoed. Obadele's head whipped towards her. He had seen her. Adanne lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding in her chest. The events of the previous night haunted her. Obadele was a monster, a beast hiding in human form. But she could not let him know that she had seen his transformation. Morning came too quickly. When Obadele returned, his usual charming demeanor was intact. His golden robe shimmered in the light, and his voice was as smooth as ever. "You seemed restless last night, my love," he said over breakfast, watching her closely. Adanne forced a smile. "It is just my new home. I am still adjusting." His lips curled upward, but his eyes remained cold. "You will grow used to it in time." Fear gripped her heart, but she lowered her gaze and nodded. She had to find answers. That afternoon, when Obadel disappeared into the forest, Adanne searched the palace. She wandered through the endless halls, pressing against the stone walls, looking for anything, any clue that could help her understand what he truly was. Then, behind a heavy tapestry, her fingers brushed against something, a seam in the stone, a hidden door. With trembling hands, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dark and cold, the air thick with dust. Old scrolls and decaying books lined the shelves. And then, on a pedestal in the center of the room, she saw it. An ancient book bound in dark leather. Adanne wiped off the dust and opened the pages. Her stomach twisted. Horrific drawings covered the pages. Women screaming in agony. A monstrous figure with sharp claws devouring its victims. A bride, her soul being pulled from her body. The text was written in an old language, but she could understand enough. The cursed prince must consume the soul of his bride before the full moon ends, or he shall wither away, doomed to eternal torment. The words burned in her mind. She was his next victim. A cold chill ran through her. Her breaths came in short, panicked gasps. She had to escape before the next full moon. Determined, Adanne spent the next hours searching for a way to break the curse. But every text, every scroll, spoke only of doom. Her only chance was to find out what lay behind the locked door. As night fell, Adanne snuck into Obadel's chamber. She rummaged through his belongings, her hands shaking. Then, her fingers closed around a heavy, rusted key. Her pulse pounded as she tiptoed through the palace. Shadows danced across the walls as the torches flickered. The door loomed before her. Ancient markings pulsed faintly across the surface, as if warning her away. Adanne swallowed hard. The curse, the woman nodded. He was condemned to live as a beast, feeding on the souls of innocent brides to maintain his human form. He thought he could escape fate, but the gods see all. Adanne felt the weight of the woman's words press against her chest. She was meant to be his next victim. "Is there a way to break the curse?" she whispered. The old woman's expression darkened. "Only one, but it will not be easy." Adanne leaned in, desperate. "Tell me." The woman's eyes burned like embers in the dim light. Obadel must willingly drink the sacred water of the gods. Only then will his monstrous form be stripped away forever. Adanne's stomach twisted. How can I make him drink it? The old woman stepped closer. You must trick him. Make him believe it is something he desires. Adanne's fingers clenched into fists. It was dangerous, impossible even, but she had no other choice. Outside, the night deepened. The full moon rose, casting an eerie glow over the palace. Time was running out. Adanne returned to her chambers, her mind racing. How could she deceive a monster? A plan began to form. She lit candles, set out golden goblets, and draped herself in the most beautiful dress she could find, a wedding dress Obadel had gifted her. Then she mixed the sacred water into a goblet of honeyed wine. She sat on the bed, waiting. Minutes passed. Then the door creaked open. A dark silhouette stood in the doorway. Obadele. His red eyes gleamed in the dim light. His breath was heavy, animalistic. His sharp claws tapped against the doorframe. "You cannot run forever," he murmured, his voice both smooth and deadly. "You are mine, Adanne." Adanne forced a trembling smile. "I know," she whispered. Obadele tilted his head, intrigued. "You accept your fate?" She swallowed the bile rising in her throat. "If I am to be yours, let it be a celebration," she said, lifting the goblet. "A wedding drink, before our union is complete." The beast hesitated. Adanne held her breath. Would he see through the deception? Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Obadele stepped forward and took the goblet from her hands. He raised it to his lips. Adanne's heart nearly stopped. Then he drank. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Obadele's body convulsed. He dropped the goblet, clutching his throat. A terrible scream tore from his lips as his body began to shift. His dark fur burned away, his claws retracted, his monstrous form twisting and breaking. The palace trembled as if the very walls were crying out. Obadele collapsed to the floor, gasping in pain. When he looked up, he was no longer a beast. He was a man, weak, vulnerable, mortal. Obadele lifted his trembling hands, staring at them in shock. His red eyes had faded to dark brown, human once more. He looked at Adanne. "What have you done?" Adanne stepped back, gripping the edge of the table for support. "I ended it," she whispered. Obadele's eyes filled with something she had never seen before, fear. "Please," he begged, "do not leave me like this." Adanne shook her head. "I was never yours." With that, she turned and ran. The palace shook violently, the walls cracking, the ground trembling beneath her feet. She did not stop. She ran past the grand halls, past the broken doors, past the ghosts of the women who had suffered before her. She ran until she burst into the forest, the cold night air wrapping around her like a shield. Behind her, the palace began to crumble. The monstrous kingdom that had once belonged to Obadele vanished into dust. By dawn, Adanne reached the village. She stumbled into the familiar streets, tears streaming down her face. The villagers gasped, rushing toward her. She was safe. But as she looked back toward the forest, she saw something, someone, the old woman. She stood at the edge of the trees, watching in silence. Then, with a knowing nod, she whispered into the wind, "The gods have spoken." And with that, she vanished. Adanne knew she would never see the palace again, and she prayed that she would never see Obadele again either. But deep in the shadows, where the forest met the forgotten ruins, the wind howled, and a single whisper echoed in the night. This is not the end. And with that, this part of this journey comes to a breathtaking close. But this is not the end, far from it. The next part will take you even deeper into a world of adventure, mystery, and shocking twists you never saw coming. What new challenges await? What secrets remain untold? You won't want to miss what happens next. Stay tuned for the next thrilling chapter. It's bigger, bolder, and more suspenseful than ever. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep the legend alive. See you in the next adventure. And stay tuned.